This is
Joseph Cohen. And Joseph Cohen has walked an unconventional path. At the age of 19, he dropped out of Wharton Business School and decided to create his own path. And while he was a student at Wharton, he founded Lore Inc., an educational company that raised $6 million in venture financing and was later successfully sold in 2013. Currently, he is the founder of Universe, a mobile app that provides website making services. Universe is designed to provide its user with the easy, no-fuss website making process and secured $10 million in Series A funding from Google Ventures. After creating and working on Universe, he became a Forbes 30 Under 30 honoree. So now we just have a few questions that we would like to ask you, and we assure that there's going to be some Q&A questions as well. So, hi, Mr. Cohen.
Hi, Mr. Cohen. Can you hear us well?
Oh,
no problem.
I think you might be muted.
Hey, do you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes,
we hear you now.
you.
Thank you for joining us here today, Mr.
Great.
Cohen. Thank you.
Great to be here.
Yeah, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well.
Okay. So we're just gonna sort of jump right ahead into it, unless there's something that you would like to talk about first.
No, I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have.
Yeah. All right. So can you just start off by talking a little bit about Universe and how you got there?
Yeah. So Universe is an app that allows you or anyone to build an amazing website right from your phone or your iPad. It doesn't require any technical skills, any code, and it allows you to create a site for yourself, for your business, for any project that you're working on. You can take payments through it. You can start a store, etc. We've been doing this for about 3 years. We're a team of 24. About 500,000 people have been able to create a site using our app, and we are growing quickly. And we exist to really build tools that allow people of all kinds to create on the internet and to build things. It's something that I've been sort of obsessed with for years, even before starting the company, because now that we're all living on the internet, I've become passionate about building tools that democratize who can create on the internet, as opposed to just a select few having it be everybody. So that's our story.
Yeah, I love that. I know for something that differentiates Universe from other like website services, creating services like Wix or Squarespace, it's like through an app on the phone, right? So it's all like on the mobile. How,
Yes.
like,
What inspired you to create that idea?
like why the mobile?
Well, there's a few reasons. One is that people think about mobile as phones. We call them phones, but the truth is they're not phones. They can make phone calls, but phones are actually just tiny computers that do tons of things and fit in your pocket. And it turns out that those computers have become the most important computers in our lives. The most people in the world have them. They use them the most time. They know how to use them. And so it made sense to me that if you're building a website, obviously you would do it on your primary computer, right? The computer that everyone has. And phones have really made computing universal. It turns out that 80% of the websites that are visited from phones. And so I thought, okay, well, if most of the sites are visited from phones, they should be created on a phone. So that was the second point. And finally, the way that you use a phone or an iPad is very different than the way that you use a traditional computer. With a traditional computer, you're using a keyboard and a mouse. With a phone, you're using your fingers. And so what that allows for is a much more organic interaction between the user and the computer. And so it means that as a designer, we can create much more organic tools and interfaces that are much more fun to use and easy to use. And so people often describe our app as fun, as feeling like play and like an instrument, like a musical instrument. and that's very much the intention. It'd be very hard to do that in a traditional desktop computer.
Our next question is something that was just asked on the Q&A section, and as well as one that Jesse and I are very interested in. And
I'm sure everyone who interviews you probably asked this question.
Yeah. You had dropped out of Wharton Business School at 19 to continue working on your previous business lore. And for a lot of teenagers watching this right now, who are, worried about their university applications like Jesse and I, could find it hard to imagine why. So what motivated you to make that decision?
A few things first. Penn is an amazing place. Wharton's an amazing place. I'm incredibly thankful and lucky to have gone. And it really is, and it's just a magical environment. And, the thing I'd say here is I think that college for most people is the right thing, but it's not the right thing for everybody. And so I think it really requires thinking about, what makes you tick and what you want in your life. For me, I went to Penn because I was really interested in the combination of technology and business and design. And I thought that by going to a business school, I could learn how to create a business. I'd started my own little projects growing up, but I thought that, oh, if I wanted to create a real business, I should go to a business school to do it. And when I was at Penn, I created a product that became my first company, a couple of our students, and I also started learning about Silicon Valley, the tech industry, and how businesses are created in that environment. I met a bunch of people at Penn who were from that world, and I realized that I didn't need to finish school to pursue my ambitions. Um, now, and I was also really excited and uh, I wanted to get started. I was sort of impatient, um, and so I left after my sophomore year to start my first company, and we raised capital for it. I moved to New York, and it was definitely a unorthodox move. I'm pretty sure I'm the only person who left in our year, and I don't necessarily recommend it for everyone. I think that for me, what I realized at that time was that I love to learn. It's one of my main passions, but the way that I learn is not in a traditional environment. I'm much more of an autodidact, someone who sort of learns on their own. And when I left school, it was really as part of a commitment to myself that I would continue that journey of self-learning and self-development. And so, after I sold my first company, Lore, I actually spent a year of sort of self-directed education. I didn't go back to school, but I read a lot of books and I took some classes and I pursued different curiosities. So I think that for me, I think what school gives you is it gives you a baseline, that a baseline education that is really useful for navigating the world. I think that if you're the kind of person who needs some kind of structure to really be disciplined or to really sort of um, nurture your talents and your sort of intellectual growth, school is a time-tested mechanism for doing that. There are also a lot of other benefits to school, like the people that you meet, the ideas that you're exposed to. And I missed out on some of that by leaving early. So I really wouldn't necessarily recommend it to everybody. But I think that if you feel a compulsion, a real burning drive to go out into the world and to build something, and that you don't feel like school is the right tool for you, then you should absolutely go and figure it out. I mean, it used to be, right now in America, everyone takes for granted that, if you're ambitious, you go to school. Like it's sort of table stakes. You go to a good college, or you want to go to a good college. But it wasn't always like that. The idea of everyone going to college is a very new idea. 100 years ago, most people, the overwhelming majority of people, did not go to college. Like 1-2% of people went. And one of the great things we've done is we've broadened who can access college, but we've also started to confuse college for this sort of like requirement for everything you want to do in your life, and it's just not. Like college is a specific instrument and a tool for certain things. And not everyone functions in that way. I have friends who are artists and musicians and writers and craftspeople, and they don't have traditional educations, and they're wiser for it. I also have lots of friends who are very well educated, and they've gotten a lot from it. I was with a friend last night who has a PhD and a law degree, and he's super super educated, um, and that's what he loves. So it's not a one size fits all thing, and I'd really encourage that mentality. And I think that the big thing is to really commit to a process of self exploration, and to sort of not make decisions based on what other people expect of you or what society expects, but of what makes you flourish, what makes you feel unlocked. So yeah.
Right, of course. And I feel like that again was something that a lot of the audience today needs to hear, because we're part of this demographic that is about to apply to university, and it's like it's always been like drilled in our minds that like there's only one path. But I feel like from your story, like we know that like there's not just one way to go about things. We have actually a question from someone asking, given that the decision to leave Penn is unorthodox, what are some of the challenges that you had to overcome, and how did you overcome them?
Well, I think if you want to be an entrepreneur, you're committing to a life without sort of guardrails. And what I mean by that is, when you take a job, at the end of the day, you have a boss and you do your job well, you're okay. And there's a box that you're in, and that is very grounding. It provides safety and assurance. And when you decide to be an entrepreneur, you're staking it out on your own. There's no guardrails. Like, it's just you. And if you fail, you fail. There's no one to catch you. And a similar thing is true when you leave school. Like, the reality is that if you don't have a degree, you don't have that to fall on. And not like it's going to save you, but it's another thing. It's another thing on the ladder. Now, yeah, that could sound scary, the idea of not having, boundaries, guardrails to keep you sort of stable and afloat and on the right track, so to speak. But you have to ask the question, like, for what? Like, what is it for? What does it mean? Like, what, so you get guardrails, but what are you preventing against? What happens if you fail? Like, what happens? And the truth is that when you fail, it's not as bad as you think. And it builds character, and it allows you to confront the world directly instead of through sort of intermediating layers. So when you go off and be an entrepreneur, when you go become an artist, when you strike out on your own, when you leave the institutions, whether that's a school or a company, you're committing to a life that is much more unfiltered, that is much more direct. And that comes with more quote unquote risk, but it also is incredibly enlivening and energizing because you're directly touching it. And that's just a different kind of life. And so I think for me, I committed to that, but I've stumbled, um, and I've had to wrestle with the fact that if I do fail, I don't have a traditional path to fall back on. And that could be scary. Uh, and so, yeah, I mean, I think I can talk about specific things and how that's materialized, but at a high level, um, you're charting your own path. You cannot, there's no one to tell you, this is what you should do next. This is the next promotion that you should get. If you just sort of check this box, you're good. Like, you're free and you're in the world, and you need to define success for yourself. And that could be intimidating, but it's also incredibly liberating. So it's two sides of the same coin.
Going back to how you said that there's nothing for you to fall back on. Would you say that's what made you strive even further?
I mean, it is motivating to not have something to fall back on, but there's different kinds of motivation. sometimes a fear of failure can be it could be counterproductive because you're motivated not by a passion or a love, but you're motivated by a fear. And in general, you don't want that, because the best work comes from a place of strength and not fear. And so you could be motivated by competition or by excellence. And those are wonderful things. But so I would say that yes, it's definitely been a motivator, but it's also something that I've had to manage because it could be something that holds you back. Um, and you can get really anxious and in your head about that. So um, I wouldn't recommend doing, like not having a safety net so that you feel more motivated to succeed, even though there is a bit more of a fire because of that. Because that would be an artificial thing.
Some people like can deem like safety nets as like a business partner. Was that like was that like a option you had?
I think that is a form of a safety net, but I think like a lot of safety nets are really illusions. Like, what does it really mean? But having a partner is a great thing. If you can find someone that you really resonate with, uh, then it's wonderful. Most companies are started by pairs of people. Most partnerships are really incredible. And I don't have a co-founder at Universe. I do have many partners internally though on my team, and that's been incredibly helpful. Um, but I think you can't force it. So I've tried to work with people in a co-founding capacity, and it didn't work for me. And I think it's all about the chemistry. And so if you find someone who you really click with, ride it. But if it's not there, don't let that get in the way. And you can do it yourself.
This question.
Oh, before we answer one of the new questions on the Q&A section, there's just one more thing I wanted to ask in relation to university, which was that, or more like when you were younger, you started your own company at 19. So for teenagers who are interested in starting their own business, what is your biggest tip for them?
Start. Just get started. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's the perfect idea. It doesn't matter if it's the perfect people or the perfect time. Just start. Being an entrepreneur is much more like being an athlete than people think. And what I mean by that is you need to practice. You need to build your skill. It doesn't come for free. It's not like, oh, you have a great idea, you build it and it works. Like, no, it's a practice. It is a muscle. It is a skill set, and you need to develop that skill set. And so your first ideas are going to be crappy, but it doesn't matter. You're learning the skills. And the truth is that in any venture, the thing that you start doing is not the thing you end up succeeding with. It always evolves. And so don't let that get in the way. And even before I started my first company in college, I was starting little businesses throughout middle school and high school. Um, and that helped me, give me the confidence to start my first thing when I was that young. And then starting my first thing when I was 19 um, gave me the confidence to start my next company. And the other thing about starting companies that's really cool is, my first company, Lore, was an education company. This company is a mobile creative tool company. They have nothing to do with each other. They're completely different. It's not the same industry. And one of the cool things about being an entrepreneur is that if you're a curious person, it gives you almost permission to go learn something entirely new and go become great at that thing. And so you're building almost a meta a skill set that allows you to go into a new area, learn, synthesize those learnings into a coherent thesis, and then execute against that, and then grow an organization that sustains itself. So, the way though that you get good at that process is by starting and exercising it and running the cycle over and over and over, just like an athlete would. Um, and uh, and so that would be my advice: get started, learn about learn about the mechanics of business, learn about the ingredients that are involved, make mistakes, try new things, meet people, reach out to folks who you admire, ask them questions, be a sponge, and don't have any affectations about coming across as dumb or whatever. Like, ask stupid questions, try weird things, um, and don't give up.
When you were in between, like after you talked about this little gap where you started like self-learning a lot of things. And you mentioned a bit about it, like just asking people for question about like your questions and then reading. Are there any other like approaches you took during that part where you were?
Yeah, it's a good question. I moved to a new city. I moved to San Francisco, and part of my year of learning was learning about San Francisco and meeting new people there. Um, I took a drawing class at the California College of the Arts. I read a lot of books, but I also reached out to people who inspired me. So there's this guy. His name is Bill Atkinson, and he was one of the early engineers at Apple. And he was responsible for designing a lot of the original Macintosh user interface in 1984. And after he did that, he built an application called HyperCard. And it was sort of like a creative tool for early computers that gave people who weren't technical lots of superpowers. And I was incredibly inspired by this piece of software. And I wanted to create the sort of the next generation of it for mobile phones. That was the inspiration behind Universe. Um, so I reached out to him, and I asked him if he'd meet up with me because I knew he was in the region, and he invited me to his house for lunch. And I went there, and we had an incredible meal, and he told me the story of how he created HyperCard, and it was incredible. And I did that kind of thing with lots of other people, but just reaching out to folks who I thought were inspiring and sitting down for a coffee and just learning. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, of course. And then you mentioned how like it's definitely important to not like when you're trying to approach people and ask questions, like not be scared of like sounding dumb or just being scared in general. Do you have any other tips like regarding that? Like as someone younger or someone with like less experience, it's not such like a beautiful resume, like how are some what are some tips that you would give for teenagers who want to like ask questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think curiosity is king. So just be unapologetically curious, and have no hesitation or um, reticence around asking questions that might seem obvious. Um, Anyone who's worth asking a question to will revel in a question that might seem simplistic. Often, the most interesting questions are the most simple ones. Um, and I would just not be afraid. I mean, I think that I just be yourself. Don't put on airs. Uh, be be very curious and inquisitive, but also be well researched. Like, do your homework, understand who you're speaking to, read anything that's available online about them, ask questions that are pointed and relevant, and really show up. And then follow up. Be conscientious. Follow up with anything that's relevant. Stay in touch, and nurture those relationships. I mean, believe it or not, a lot of the people who I work with today, I met when I was 19, 10 years ago. And a bunch of the investors who have backed my first company when I was 19 have now backed Universe. Um, and those relationships are incredibly rewarding, and they're the result of a lot of mutual investment on both sides. And so that comes with being honest, being yourself, and um, just reaching out. Most people will engage. Most people will engage. And I think the other thing is I would encourage folks to go beyond the surface of who everyone else is interested in. Like we all like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, uh, but there's a lot of really talented, interesting people that aren't on the covers of magazines and that you can learn a lot from. And so I'd encourage people to go find those people.
So we were on the topic of education. So someone had a question about this. I'm just going to quote their question. Do you think the pandemic is hastening a higher education transformation? What do you think the post-secondary school model will look like in 5 years?
I think that's a great question, and I think it will. I think that the pandemic it is already accelerating our shift to the internet, which has already been happening, but it's accelerating it in every facet of life. And education is going to be affected by it in a very significant way. The reality is that the school experience hasn't changed in a very long time, and that it should. Now, do I think the future of school is everyone in a Zoom lecture? No, definitely not. But I think that it's forcing us to confront and change and adapt. And I do think there's really two aspects to the problem with college right now. One is experiential. Like the reality is that we have this sort of romantic idea of a seminar. It's a small group of people engaging around philosophy, and in practice, like that's just not how most school happens. Most school is a giant lecture hall, a man on the stage, giving a lecture, and that isn't that isn't the best way to learn in most cases. And so I think that technology is going to allow us to reimagine the experience of education. And I think the pandemic is forcing us to reckon with that because we can't meet in person. So that's the first thing. The second thing is economic. Um, School's really expensive, and um, a lot of people take out a lot of debt to go to school. And when people take out debt for things that they don't necessarily get value out of, that are increasingly expensive for the same product, like school gets more expensive every year, but the product is the same. The school is the same. And so what you have arguably is the dynamics of a financial bubble. And it's debt driven. Um, and because the pandemic is affecting schools' enrollments and their costs, it is very likely that some schools will go bankrupt and actually not be able to sustain themselves. And if that trickle down happens, you could end up having a financial collapse in higher education, which would pave a path towards a new model in a lot of cases. Now, the top schools it's not going to happen to them. They'll be insulated, but you know, there's a lot of schools in this country. There's a few thousand, and so they're probably more than there need to be actually. And so a lot of them will at some point um, go under, and that's going to pave the way for a new generation and a new model of education. I think a lot about what the future of school can look like. One of the things we did at Universe is we raised capital from an investor called Y Combinator, and they have a unique model, which is that they invest a relatively small amount of money, but unlike most firms that just write you a check, they write you a check, but they actually have you come out to California for 3 months. And it's a 3-month experience where you and a bunch of other founders get together once a week and talk and work through your biggest challenges. And you get to meet incredible entrepreneurs and investors. And so it really helps you build your company and grow yourself as an entrepreneur. And so that is very much an education experience. It's very much a school in a non-traditional way, but it only lasts for 3 months. Instead of you paying, you get paid, and it's completely self-directed. You don't have to, there's no prerequisites, there's no grades, there's no midterms. It's entirely on you to get value out of the thing. So if you don't show up, you don't get the value. So that obviously isn't a model for everybody, but it is a model for some people. And so I think you're going to see a lot more kinds of experiments like that. That happens to work in a business context, but we haven't really seen different kinds of experiments in science, in engineering, in the arts, in the humanities, in the in literature, and I expect that we will see unorthodox models in that way, and that's going to be great.
Well, I think like in general for the impact of COVID and, in the future with education and everything, I feel like a lot more people will start pivoting or adapting and thinking of new ways, because this entire year, for us at least, like we found different ways to learn. We've gone through Coursera, we've gone through like all these master classes, and it's actually like, it's really interesting to see how we can like keep on learning even at home. Yeah.
100%.
In a similar vein, how has the pandemic sort of affected your business and how did you adapt to that?
Well, in our case, we we were unaffected by the pandemic, and it actually has been a bit of a tailwind for us for a couple reasons. First is that our product exists on the internet and helps people build a presence on the internet. So if people are spending more time on the internet, we benefit. Second, our company from day one has been a distributed and remote company, meaning that we don't have a central office. We have people who are all over North America. And so we didn't miss a beat. When the pandemic hit, we actually started hiring people. And we're 24 people. We were 10 when the pandemic first started. And so we've over doubled in size since then. And it's not, adding people, when you're doubling size is a hard thing to do because your processes have to scale up, you have to coordinate. And we've been able to do it pretty well despite having never met in person. And that's because we've been practicing for 2 years in advance. But then the final thing is that, in a moment of economic change and people losing their jobs and their businesses closing, it's a moment where we're seeing a renaissance of new businesses, new entrepreneurialism. And that's not just like a coffee shop or something like that, but it's a musician who is selling their own beats or making merch, or it's a teacher who's sort of writing a lecture that you can go buy. And so we're seeing this wave of creativity and of commerce. And so what we decided to do is to really lean into that and allow entrepreneurs to sell things on their websites. Before the pandemic, we actually didn't offer tools to sell things directly through Universe. You had to use another service to do that. And now you could actually start a business entirely using Universe. You could take payment through it. You can upload your inventory. You can manage your inventory for your products. You can even ship your products through the app. We will generate a shipping label on the phone. So we take care of all of that for you. And we've doubled down on that in the pandemic. And one of the reasons we were able to do that is the way that we work as a company is we don't plan out, oh, this is what we're going to do for the next 18 months. We have a general vision that we're working towards, but we're very nimble and iterative in how we get there. And so we're able to react. And if we have a good idea or if something in the world changes in a week or 2 weeks, we can change our focus and go after that. And so we did that to some degree when it comes to commerce and enabling commerce. And we're continuing to pull that thread, which has been very fruitful for us so far.
Is that something like the approach you guys took for sort of like going with the flow and adapting to whatever challenges you guys meet? Like, is that something you would recommend for all entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say go with the flow. I think that you want to be more like a heat-seeking missile, meaning that the way I look at it is like, imagine you have an idea, but by its nature, when you have an idea, it's new to you. You don't know that much about it. You don't know that much about the arena in which that idea exists. So it's a very broad sense of an idea. And so you can think about it almost like when you look out into the world, when you look at your gaze, your net is very wide. And when you start shipping things, when you start bringing things into the world, you're sort of like spraying ideas within that range. And as you start putting things out, certain things start to land more than other things. Like what you realize is that actually the range is not this wide, it's like this wide, it's this wide, it's this wide, and it keeps to getting more narrow. And your job as an entrepreneur is to focus that range over time as you get more signal, as you get more of a sense of what works. And your job is to focus on that and narrow the range of your shot, so to speak. And so you're almost like a magnet or a journalist. You're listening and you're observing and you're looking for signal, and then you're doubling down on that signal and you're pulling the thread. So that is, pandemic or no pandemic, an absolutely critical skill of being an entrepreneur. You need to be able to be a really good listener for what is working and what isn't. With that said, I don't recommend an entrepreneur to be sort of a reed in the wind, just easily sort of taken by what comes. I think that you need to have an opinion. You need to have a set of values that you stick to. But but as you learn more about the world, you figure out which of those to lean into and how you do that. Because if you don't, then you'll just be sort of swept up by the world. So it's a balance, right? You want, if you're too headstrong and stubborn, it's not going to ever work because you're just in your own lane and you're not reacting to the world. You're not listening. But if you're too sort of open, then you'll never do anything interesting because you're just doing what already exists. So it's finding that balance.
You had talked about sort of having somewhat of a long-term plan, but also being flexible. What exactly is your long-term vision as an entrepreneur?
I'll say at Universe, our mission is to empower everybody to build the internet. And the way that we're going to get there is by building what we call a universal language for creating the web. What do I mean? A universal language. Well, for building things on the internet, we often will use what's called programming languages. Like, programming languages involve code. You need to learn a new language. Sometimes it's called Python, sometimes it's called JavaScript. You might be familiar with them. These languages are inherently esoteric. They are not languages for humans, they're languages for machines. And so our job at Universe is to build a language that is human, but that unlocks the capabilities of what you can normally do with a traditional programming language. And the difference between a language and another kind of tool is that a language allows someone to make something original with it. Like, if you think about it, when we speak, when we have a conversation, there is a very good chance that in the course of our conversation, one of us will say something, will string together a set of words that has never, ever been strung together in the history of the world. And so in just day-to-day conversation, because we know how to use this language, we are creating unique things with it. And that is the beauty of a language. It allows for infinite possibilities and combinations of the parts. In our language, it's not about words, it's about sort of building blocks, visual to visual language. And so that is the ambition and the general plan. So if it's possible on the internet, you should be able to do it with Universe. And we've enabled a lot already, but there's a lot more that we haven't enabled yet. And so our ambition is that if you think it, you can build it. And you don't need to ask your programming friend or hire someone or, go learn how to write Python for 3 years. Like, if you think it, you can build it. That's the ambition.
Previous to starting Universe, you've also started quite a few different other companies. And I think you online, it says that you're a serial entrepreneur, which which is someone who has created a lot of different businesses throughout their lives. So how has your previous experience running businesses affected how you run your business now?
Like I said, being an entrepreneur is very much a process of developing a set of skills and a muscle for creating something out of nothing. And I think a big part of that is being able to synthesize many different streams into something that's cohesive. So what I mean by that is, at Universe, we make an app. To make an app, you need engineers, you need code, you need designers, you need people who think about product. But we're also a business, so you need people who understand finance, you need people who understand operations and human resources and recruiting, and we have people who do customer support, and we have 5 types of engineers and people who work on marketing. So it's all these different disciplines coming together. And as an entrepreneur, you need to be able to not be the best at any one of those things, but to be able to put the whole thing together. Um, and so in general, the more you do that, the more projects you start, the more companies you build, the better you get at synthesizing those different streams. Um, so I think that my past experiences have helped with that. I think that one of the challenges though, when you're a young entrepreneur is to if it doesn't work immediately, to try something new. And actually a lot of times you need to stick with it. So we've been building our current product at Universe for 3 years, but I actually started the company over 6 years ago. And for the first 3 years, we were building a different thing. And we really didn't have traction for that first 3.5 years. It's only been in the last 2 years that things have really taken off. And so you need to stick with it because it doesn't just work. And so that's probably the biggest lesson that I've learned so far.
During those few years where there wasn't that much feedback or traction, I'm sure you felt some sort of anxiety or fear of possibly losing the thing
Mm-hmm.
that you created. Is there do you
How
have
did
any
you
advice to that, or are there any ways that you overcame it?
Well, it's an ongoing struggle. I think any entrepreneur or CEO would even at the big scale would tell you that they there are things that keep them up at night. Look, I think that for everyone it's different, but learning how to manage your psychology is a really important part of the job. And for me, I do things like I meditate, I exercise regularly, I've created routine that keeps me grounded. But I also surround myself with people who are constructive and help. And so that's a big part of it. Um, and remembering why you're doing it is really important. Um, and working on something I think you're passionate about is most important when things are tough, because when they are tough, if you can return to this central motivating factor, then it keeps you energized and inspired. And that's something that's really important.
Yeah. Previously you had talked about finding and reaching out to people that you found interesting and that it doesn't necessarily have to be very big names. Could you give us some advice, especially targeted more towards teenagers, on networking and expanding your network?
The big thing is that it should be genuine and not transactional. So I don't like the word networking because I think that it has a transactional nature. I want something from you. I want to go meet this person at a conference so that I could get a job or whatever. And um, I think that all people want to be able to connect with others in a way that is meaningful. And so I think that one of the ways you do that is by being earnest and genuine and like I said, doing your research and being human, not putting on airs. I think another way of doing it is putting yourself in environments where you will meet people who share values and interests with you. So if you like, I don't know, 3D printers, going to meetups for 3D printing people and hanging out in the forums online. And like, you want to be in places that sort of the people that you want to learn from are, even if you don't know who they are, you're around them. Um, so that's a factor as well.
Something else we were talking about, we're like jumping everywhere, with your dynamics in like at Universe. So you mentioned how in the past you guys have always like mostly worked virtually. Is that do you guys like struggle with sometimes like getting the point across, or communication, stuff like that, like deadlines? I don't know, like sometimes for school, for example, it can, when it's virtual, sometimes people think things are less serious. Not me, not adding anyone. But I don't know if that's a case that you guys had to deal with.
So our company is designed from the ground up to work in this way. And it is different than working in a traditional company. We're all in different places, and sometimes it's harder to get a point across through video. But what we require is really good communication. So it just requires that you like make the point. If you need to write it out, if you need to get on a call to do it, most ideas can be communicated through technology. But it requires that you be perhaps a little bit more thoughtful and intentional, which I think is actually good practice. There are times when you want to have a looser, more creative, collaborative kind of communication. And for that, pre-pandemic, we would get together every few months to in person to do what we call an offsite, to really sort of wrestle with some of the biggest problems that we face as a company. So it's a balance of those things. But in general, um, I think that uh, most of the time it's an excuse when people say they can't really be productive. We're a lot more productive as a remote company because people can have exactly the environment they want. But here's the thing, like, you need to be motivated. You need to be self-motivated. Like, the people who work at our company, they want to do great work. They get up in the morning and they want to create something amazing. And no one needs to tell them they do this, do that. Like, that's what inspires them. That's why they get up and they're excited for the day. And so I think that's really the critical point. Like, if you felt, oh, I love school, this and that, whatever, I love what I'm working on, you're going to do it because you love it. But the sad reality is that most people don't have that relationship to school, which is okay. Um, but I just say, like, self-motivated people are the ones who really create great things. So find the vector that that you are self-motivated about. Find the thing that you don't need anyone to push you on, and find other people who feel the same way. And when you do that, yeah, there are challenges and technology gets in the way, whatever, but you deal with them. Like, there's no, you know, you make it work.
I think that actually ties quite well to one of the questions in the Q&A session, which is that, and you sort of, I think we're assuming that you would believe that willpower as an entrepreneur and just as someone who works in general is extremely important. So what do you think are good ways for teenagers to sort of train it, if it is something that you could train?
I think it is incredibly important. I don't know if it's something that you can train. I think it is. I think that, well, there's this guy Jocko Willink, who was like an ex-Navy SEAL commander who writes a lot about this. I'd recommend checking his stuff out. But I think he wrote a book called like Discipline Equals Freedom. And I think that um, maybe this is useful. It's a trick that I think about. So we often think about ourselves as like a single entity, like um, like uh, like I'm a human and I have a singular identity. But the reality is there are actually different identities within us. So, for example, let's say you're on a diet and this diet says no cookies, right? And you walk by a bakery and the smell is just intoxicating. Like, you smell the most incredible cookie ever, and you look in the window and there it is, and it's so good, and the woman there just offers you one for free, right? So now you have a conversation in your head. There's two voices. There's one voice that says, I want this cookie, it looks incredible and it's probably so good. And the other voice in your head is like, well, no, I'm on this new diet, I don't eat cookies. And so you're having this argument. There's really like two people, two minds that are battling it out, if you will. And that dialectic, that conversation is actually very important and it's very useful. And I think that willpower is often about going with your long-term interest over your short-term interest. So it's about listening to the person saying, no, this is how you're eating, as opposed to the person is tempted by that cookie. And there are ways that you can fortify that more disciplined side of you. I think one way I think about it is that imagine that we gave names to the different sort of components of how we think. So the one that wants the cookie is like the the kid, let's just say. It's like, the kid in the situation, and the diet person is actually like the parent, like the adult, right? Um, and you have to realize that, like, in each of us, we actually have a kid and a parent, and that you need to be a good parent sometimes. You have to like take care of the kid. And sometimes that means being more disciplined. Sometimes it means, allowing them to fail. You just sort of need to manage yourself. And that is a little bit how I look at it. It's like there's a lot that's been written about managing other people. I actually think you need to manage yourself, because within us, we have multiple entities. I know that's a little bit of a weird idea, but it's something that served me well.
The speaker before you, we were talking about like communicating with yourself, like you're two people or like different entities, and she was saying how like this is different case though, like when you're tackling more of like the emotional aspect of like your emotional strength and stuff, like you have to be your best friend, or you have to, like in your case,
Yeah,
be like your parent, someone that like taking on different roles to sort of like fulfill this one like mentality or train it, I think will come
absolutely.
pretty useful for everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you're a coach, sometimes you're a friend, sometimes you're consoling. Like, but there's always going to be this sort of internal relationship between your ego and the other parts of yourself. Um, and I think that having an awareness of that and being generous and understanding and listening is important. But other times you need to be firm and assertive.
Of course. Oh, one more question I think we have.
Yeah. We were talking about willpower and self-motivation. So other than willpower and self-motivation, what are other skills and character traits that you feel are critical to becoming a leader?
I think, like I said, curiosity is very important, because that's the guiding light. That's how you figure out where you want to go. Um, I think that uh, communication is incredibly important. Being able to distill complex things into simple, actionable narratives, ideas is critical. And I mean, you got to work really hard. You got to put in the hours and be there. Um, I think that also connection is really important. The ability to connect with people, and um, and I think vision is incredibly important. Where do you want to go? Why is this interesting? And um, and can you create a vision that other people want to be a part of? Um, and so I think those are some of the ingredients, and learning, the ability to learn and self-correct and to improve and to get back up when you fail, and to not give up, to be tenacious. Um, these are all all the things that you need to do. I think also, as one becomes a leader, you also need to, and this is something I struggle with, but let go a little bit, and bring other people into the fold and allow them the space to be their best self. Ultimately, what a leader does is they bring the best out of others, and they allow other people to become the best version of themselves. And um, that is a process of sort of designing the right environment for people to thrive, which means giving them space. So there are a number of different factors, um, but yeah, those are some of the points that I have.
Would you also agree that, like, generally, like, being genuine about what you're trying to strive for, like, allows for those traits to come more naturally?
Say it again.
Like, if you're being genuine about your vision and what you want to fulfill, does that will that allow for those traits that you listed to come more naturally and be executed more naturally?
I think so, and I think there are different styles of leaders. I mean, I think that we have this sort of vision in our mind of a charismatic leader who can command a room. But there are other kinds of leaders. There are quiet leaders. There are leaders who are more strategic and cerebral. Um, and so I think that at the end of the day, you do need to be true to yourself. You can't fake it. And I think that when I talk about connection and being able to connect with others, that's about being genuine, right? It's about being forthright, because people can read through very easily things that don't quite feel authentic.
Does anyone else have any more questions? If you guys do, feel free to leave a question here. I don't
Can I
know.
ask a question?
Oh yeah, of course.
So, how many people are currently watching this?
We have 60 something.
And how do they find out about your conference?
Well, for us, at one point, we started off with promoting to like friends and family. And then we started off more with Instagram. And then we started promoting ads there, like of speaker bios, of individual posts, of like one of
Of
the
So,
just
are people all over?
Yeah,
yeah,
leadership tips to like get more exposure. We like this year we learned a lot about like
marketing.
ads and marketing,
Yeah.
which was like not that easy, but
Yeah. So it's a learning step.
yeah.
For sure.
Love it.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, thank you. We're really grateful to have you here with us today, and for you to answer all those questions. They were I'm sure everyone felt them.
Yeah.
It was
I
very
hope that it was helpful.
It was
definitely
for
was.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, this is kind of all the time that we have now.
Yeah.
Again, thank you so much for speaking at our conference. We really are very honored to have you come speak here. We hope you have a good day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. See ya.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Don't end me.
Oh, I shouldn't end.
um,
All right, we have one more speaker
Okay.
with us today.
But before that, we're just gonna take a 5-minute little break, and then we'll get back to you shortly.